Well, it's a beautiful spot you found us here, Daniel, for the rest day.
It's right in my street, isn't it, Rich? I'm not suggesting that I was thinking of myself.
Is this the kind of place you and Lionel have been staying
well,
the last 2 weeks?
It is, but overlooking some beautiful vineyards high up in there. Well, we're not that high, but we are in the base of the mountains overlooking Trento.
We've said goodbye to Lionel today. Sad moment. Did I see maybe a little tear in your eye?
Very emotional, very emotional. I've given him some things to work on. I sent him away with some advice, didn't I, yesterday? And yeah, look forward.
Well, you're a very sort of European man, Daniel, with your embrace of languages and so on. But it was a very British handshake you gave him.
Very cold. I'm very Nordic, aren't I, in some respects?
I expected a cuddle. Anyway, we're on the third rest day of the Giro, and my name's Richard Moore with Daniel Freeb, and we're We're going to do what you did last week, which is answer some listeners' questions. A lot of you have phoned in with questions, some really good ones, lots of them. I don't think we'll get through them all, to be honest. But let's just crack on, Daniel, because there's a lot.
Are we not going to have a quick,
no preamble or
a quick summary of our rest day?
Well, very quick, very quick. We drove a couple of hours to Trento today, and most of the riders did that transfer last night, didn't they? So it was quite a long journey.
We were at the Mitchelton Scott the real press conference earlier, and I had a quick chat with Esteban Chavez, and he said, "How are you, mate?" And I said, "Oh, I'm really tired. Esteban, I've been in a car for 2 hours. It's really tiring, this Giro."
It's quite tough,
and then I caught myself.
Yeah, it's just why I've come in to sort of inject some fresh blood, so to speak, which is not something that goes on in cycling anymore on rest days, but only in a virtual, metaphorical sense. I'm injecting some fresh blood into the cycling podcast for the final week.
I don't mind blood for it. We've got some more liquid refreshment. Wow. As I said, we're staying on a vineyard, and I think our sommelier is Marco, the owner of the property. Yes. Marco, cosa abbiamo? Cosa ci offri da bere?
Noi proponiamo qui in azienda il nostro vino, fatto esclusivamente con la nostra uva.
So, Rich, this is the wine made on the property. The grape is Tramina, which Gewürztraminer in English. So the name of the wine and the label is dedicated to Marco's grandfather, Giuseppe Fazzoler. So I think we'd better taste it, Marco.
I know enough about wine to know that it's white wine.
White wine. And this aromatic wine.
Here it comes. Let's have some sound effects.
Glug, glug, glug.
And Rich, you're going to be looking, this is Gewürztraminer, you're going to be looking for a bit of lychee, notes of lychee here. Even some people say burnt, of bacon.
I can smell the lychee. Delicious.
Excellent.
Nice dry white wine. Beautiful.
Perfetto.
Thank you very much.
Ti ringrazio.
Thank you. Well, there we go. Well, let's kick off with the first question. This isn't actually set up, but we did hear this one in advance, and it's kind of appropriate to where we are.
Well, and Rich, we are grieving the fact that tomorrow is not the wine trial officially. We're going to make it the wine trial, but we've got the wine stage the day after, haven't we?
We have.
Hello, this is Vittorio, friend of the podcast from Rovereto. It's been an exciting month here in Trentino. I strongly suggest you to ask around about the 91st Adunata Nazionale degli Alpini, which took place in Trento downtown a couple of weeks ago. I really like your comment about how the position of the time trial somehow reshuffled rider tactics all over the Giro. That's interesting also because Italian people are really into tactics. My question is whether you see an evolution of the Giro in this direction, in opposition to the Tour de France, which is way more competitive, but also slightly more standard and predictable race. Thanks for your interesting podcast.
Well, Vittorio there, who's nearby.
Rovereto, just where we're going tomorrow.
Yeah,
the finish of the time trial.
Yeah,
we'll see him.
We'll see. We'll look out for you, Vittorio. But I was interested in his comment about the Italian people being very interested in tactics.
I think our memorable conversation last week with Gianni Savio gave a little bit of a glimpse into this. It's obviously become a bit of a running joke that Gianni Savio, he always talks about cycling in relation to football, and he talks about the formation of teams. But the Italians, certainly, when they talk about football, they are very, very interested in and go into an awful lot of detail about formations and always have done. With cycling, I think they are very interested in tactics. I think this is something that comes purely from their very rich heritage.
I know around the World Championships, there's always a lot of debate around the Italian team and the way that.
But I wonder whether, the tactics are one thing, but the sort of personalities and the kind of interconnecting rivalries are another. And I think perhaps what they are kind of lusting for when they talk about tactics is the kind of often the friction, the attrition that I actually think is lacking a little bit from the Giro these days. You used to get these scenarios whereby the press, and particularly Ciro's paper, La Gazzetta, would deliberately play off the Italian rivals against each other. They would go and get comments from one rider after the finish and then go straight to the rider who was being referred to and put it to him, and then it would go back and forth. But the Giro is a very international affair these days, and everyone plays very nicely, don't they, to each other? Yeah. There's a lot of diplomacy.
Bit of spikiness from Tom Dumoulin.
A little bit. And I suppose the sort of flip side of what I said about it being very parochial and very Italian is that now things get lost in translation or mistranslated sometimes, and that gives rise to issues. I remember that happened with Dumoulin and Nibali last year, but we're not really talking about tactics here, are we? What about the time trial?
Well, we mentioned this last night, and we talked a bit today, Daniel, about how Simon Yates' focus has been so much on this time trial that he's almost it seemed to me that he's almost been treating it like a 2-week race, a bit like Lionel. Lionel's gone home today. It's almost as though there's a sort of virtual finishing line for Simon Yates. Well, before the time trial, because it was all about accumulating time before that. And I just wonder if psychologically and physically how that's going to affect him in the season.
Well, Rich, what a lot of people don't realise is there are 2 time trials this week, because there's the time trial to Rovereto tomorrow, and then there's the time trial up Prato Nevoso on, what day is it? Thursday. The first stage in the Alps. Why do I say time trial? Because Tom Dumoulin loves this kind of effort precisely because it resembles a time trial. It's a perfectly flat stage, almost identical to the stage to Europa last year, and it's a 13-kilometre climb, so what we're talking 35-minute, 40-minute effort, and like I say, it's basically a second time trial for him. So I think, well, obviously tomorrow is a day where he needs to make significant ground, but Prato Nevoso is the other one.
Let's go to our next call.
Hello, Cycling Podcast people. This is Catherine Elliott calling from Sydney, Australia. I am a long-term friend of the podcast and have a question for your press conference. I wanted to know what you all thought of the Wolf Pack. I think it's really easy to mock Quick-Step's self-styling as the Wolf Pack, being a kind of naff combination of hubris and maybe machismo. However, Quick-Step riders frequently mention it in post-race interviews. During the Giro, I've heard both Viviani and Max Schachmann put their success down to being in the Wolf Pack. I also think that Quick-Step manage the competing demands of their riders really well. You don't see the within-team rivalries that plague other teams. Plus, they all seem genuinely delighted at the end of the race when one of their group has won. So, do you know how the Wolf Pack came about, and what are your thoughts on it? Thanks a lot.
Daniel, the Wolf Pack, do you know the origins?
Well, linguistically, I think the term was coined by Brian Holm, wasn't it? And Brian, I'm sure he won't mind us saying, has a bit of a penchant for some politically un-PC nicknames and monikers at times, and there has been a suggestion that the Wolfpack is a bit there are connotations with films about Nazi Germany. I don't think it was meant with any kind of malice or reference to that was supposed to offend anyone. However, Brian is a bit of a jester at Quick-Step, and
it's a bit like the Flying Black Pudding. It would have started off as
quite innocently,
thing, and then just spiral out of control. But you can't. They've certainly embraced it. I mean, it's on the clothing, it's on the bus. You know, it's something they have embraced, and it does seem to act to galvanise them and bond them together.
I think Brian Holm was one of the key figures in a bit of a transition that took place in that team when Rolf Aldag was also there. Rolf Aldag being the former HTC High Road team manager, director sportif, and when that team folded, Brian and Rolf Aldag went across to. Was there a year gap before they went? No, they went straight away.
Straight there, I think.
And I've always felt that what they brought. Well, you can go back and look at the results as well, how the team was going before that. And there was a real sort of transition that took place, not immediately, but over the next sort of year. And part of that was very kind of redolent of what had happened at HTC High Road. A lot of young riders being given opportunities, always going to races with a leader and the desire to win the race. And, you see even guys this year like Remy Cavagna, a French neopro, who hasn't really had that much fanfare. Your mate, Rich. Hodge.
Ali.
And these guys were getting opportunities straight away. And this is something that used to happen at High Road HTC with people like František Rabon and Peter Velits and lesser lights would be given a race. It might only be a 1.2 category one day race in April that no one had heard of. But I think they were so committed the rest of the year, those guys, because they knew that sooner or later they were going to get their opportunity. And I think Quickstep have been really good at that.
Next question.
Hey guys, this is Noah from California in the United States, long-time listener, and I got a couple questions. First one is regarding the Peddler de Charme t-shirts, if those come pre-wrinkled from Rapha, or if Sam Bennett actually just does that on his own. Second question is, what is the most surprised that you guys have been at a race result in the last, we'll call it 4 or 5 years, considering Simon Yates is super impressive right now. You guys seem to have called it, but of course, great to see him nonetheless. Just like to hear what you guys' what a very impressive result has been, very surprising result rather, in the last couple of years. Thanks, love the show. Bye.
First of all, no, I did take issue with your comment there about the T-shirt not being ironed. We always get that every time we get little sarcastic
the problem
comments.
was,
even outright criticism.
You fished it out my suitcase. This is quite a long story. You fished it out my suitcase, but you didn't fish out my travel iron, which was also in my suitcase.
Yeah, but the issue really is you're always up against it. We arrived at the start, and the window to go and meet the riders and speak to them. The ironing the T-shirt is not top of our list of priorities. We are carting them around Italy, so it's not always that practical. I mean, my own clothes could do with an iron as well. But yeah, we take note of that. Maybe we'll make a special effort next week to iron the Peddler de Charme T-shirt. The other question: what any result has particularly surprised you the last few years?
In the past few years, there have been some. There was one result that I know surprised and shocked and appalled certain members of teams last year. But this is it's a name that not many people would have heard of. There was a guy called Danilo Celano, and he was riding for a small team. He was riding for Amore Vita, I think, last year, and he won the Giro dell'Appennino. And there was a chorus of indignation, I have to say, among some of the smaller Italian teams. He subsequently got a contract at Caja Rural in Spain, and he's not done an awful lot since. That indignation, possibly unfair, but the guy hadn't had too many great results in the past. But on a bigger scale,
there are a couple of reverse surprises, if you like. I was at the Tour of Utah a couple of years ago and saw Lachlan Morton dominate that race and ride really, really well against Andrew Talansky, who went on to the Vuelta and finished 5th overall there. So he was clearly going pretty well. And Lachlan Morton was riding for a small team in the US and had a go at the World Tour before with Garmin. Hadn't worked out for him, and he'd sort of gone away and found an environment that he liked and a style of racing that he liked. But he had a second chance. He's got a second chance at the moment with Dimension Data at the World Tour. And I really expected, based on some of his performances in America, for him to do something, for him to be given his chance in certain races. And I thought Dimension Data was the perfect team for that. And, I was watching the Tour of California a few nights ago and saw him getting dropped pretty early with, on the climbs, the sorts of climbs where he was performing so well a couple of years ago. I'm surprised that we've not seen more of that quality that we know he has. And I've spoken to a few people about it, and they think it's in the head rather than
usually
the body.
Is, isn't it, Rich?
It usually is.
As regards Yates, how surprised we are about Yates. I must confess that a couple of months ago, if you'd asked me if either of the Yates twins would ever win a Grand Tour, I might have been a bit sceptical, because I think it did seem towards the end of last year that maybe they'd reached a small plateau, or possibly it was the start of that plateau. But that was more to do with the fact that we knew they were coming to the end of the phase of their career where they would be qualifying for young riders competitions. And we talked amongst ourselves also about the fact that people's perspective on them would change as soon as they weren't able to win white jerseys, and all of a sudden there would be a different kind of expectation and pressure. And guys who finish consistently 7th, 8th, 9th in Grand Tours are often come to be looked at as underachievers, which is unfair. But I suspected that the Yateses might fall into that category for a few years, particularly because they are handicapped by their lack of size, really, which means that they're never going to be great time trialists, or their lack of power, I suppose.
It's an interesting question about the last pure climber to win a Grand Tour.
Yeah, I remember getting a question.
Quintana, sort of a pure climber, but a decent time trialist as well.
I remember getting a question. We did an event a couple of years ago, and someone in Manchester, and someone asked us, did we think one of or both of the Yates would ever win? I can't remember whether it was a Grand Tour or the Tour de France. I think I said that it's an unusual build for these days. There aren't many guys who win Grand Tours with that build. I suppose there have been various Giro winners, but not so much the Tour de France.
Simon Yates is unusually versatile, though. Points race world champion at the age of 19. I remember I've mentioned this before, but Jocelyn Ryan, who looked after him in Belgium for a while, I said about his build there and whether that was a handicap in the Belgian racing, and she said, "No, if you're a good rider, you're a good rider, and you can race."
And professional cycling has become more and more biased, if you like, towards, or the Grand Tours become more and more biased towards climbers. There is a trend of a fairly significant reduction of the kilometres of time trialling, and that's obviously benefited them.
Hello, Rapha podcast. My name is Rodrigo from Chicago, RCC member. My question is, in the age that we live in, is it all right to be a little bit cynical about Yates' performance? Everybody else seems to be in the same area, but he's so powerful and so strong and taking so much time. What percentage of you do you think, is there something more? Is it wrong to feel that way, or is it right?
I think that the time, I wouldn't say cynicism, it's skepticism that we want to the word that we want to use, but the time to really answer that question, or as much as you can, is at the end of the Giro rather than when 2 weeks in, as we are now. As I keep saying, there's still quite a long way to go. He has been riding incredibly well and taking time all the time when he could, but that's been a very deliberate strategy. That's been a different way of. We've seen very defensive riding in Grand Tours in recent years, and he's ridden it in a completely different way.
And Rich, he's won stages, but if you look at the time gaps, and think back to Tours de France of 10, 15 years ago, Jan Ullrich won the Tour de France by almost 10 minutes. Even Ivan Basso won the Giro by almost 10 minutes. So we're talking about pretty small time gap. Yeah, we hate to use the term now, don't we, margins or marginal gains, but the margins are finer and finer, and that's been another big trend in Grand Tours over the last few years, that they've been very close. They've been extremely close. There hasn't been. When was the last time a guy won by 5 minutes or more? It's a while, isn't it?
I guess the question is more also about just, is there always going to be questions and scepticism around the winner? We didn't see it so much with Tom Dumoulin last year.
No, but I think everyone is always entitled to pose questions about professional cycling, and they will be for a long time because of the history of the sport. And as I've said many times recently, it's an era, we're in an age where we don't really know an awful lot about what's going on in terms of medical enhancement, illegal or, illegal, because not many people are testing positive, and that denies us the information that we used to get from people testing positive, and police investigations also used to give us a lot of information about what was going on in the peloton, and neither of those two things are happening to any great degree. So no one really knows, and if you speak to riders and people in teams, they say the same. They don't really know anymore whether people are cheating or not. Whereas once they strongly suspected it.
But I'm not inclined to base my skepticism on things I read on social media, for example, or even from Times Up Mountains.
No, and also, Rich, we're still comparing. People are still bringing out figures and times up climbs from the EPO era, or or even 2006, 2007, but we're in 2018.
Things have changed a lot in other respects. We were talking about gearing. I mean, the gears that the guys are using now are very different. Now, what effect has that had? I don't know, but things do change, things do evolve.
And generally speaking, we're still not at that watermark of the times are still slightly slower than 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and an awful lot of progress has been made since then. Not just in cycling, but in every sport, I would suggest.
Hello, it's Al in Cambridge, a friend of the podcast. I was listening to the press conference episode today, and you're talking about using the native language names for races and feeling uncomfortable using that with Zulia and Ron van Vlaanderen. But I've got 3 phrases that you use all the time. The names of races in their native languages: Giro d'Italia, Tour de France, Vuelta a España. Why are those different?
I feel that's maybe a question directed at you,
Daniel. No, it's not really. No, Zulia is a very particular one because it's also tied up with politics, and there was a conscious decision made by the Tour of the Basque Country, the Vuelta al País Vasco, about 3 or 4 years ago, to rebrand and to really play on this Basque. I hesitate to say Basque nationalist, but certainly Basque, linguistically Basque identity, and it was quite a risky decision. I think they were quite nervous about doing it, but it's stuck, and it was also very effective on social media because it's a short word, and it's caught on. But yeah, there are massive contradictions in very often in the way we use foreign language terms, and some foreign language terms, and don't use others. The Il Lombardia just doesn't really sound right to me, and I always say the Tour of Lombardy. The Ronde van Vlaanderen, I don't really remember anyone using that in English until quite recently, 2 or 3 years ago. So I think every one of us is a bit inconsistent in the way we use race names and so forth.
Next caller.
Kotze chetele kotze, kotze dishnyene, nushbiko de shikora, nushbiko de shikora. Greetings, Buffalo, Napalm, and the Sideshow Bob of Coventry. My name is Cillian Kelly. Just curious what your thoughts are on the system for wildcards in the Grand Tours. It maybe doesn't specifically apply to the Giro, but the general manager of Aqua Blue Sport, Rick Delaney, was very vocal about his team's omission from the Tour de France and the Vuelta this year, having done so well in the Vuelta last year. He's been vocal on Twitter, and I think he has an article in this month's Pro Cycling magazine as well, kind of decrying the system and that how non-transparent it is, and nobody seems to know how to get a wildcard invitation. So yeah, just curious what your thoughts are and whether that whole system is fit for purpose or not. Enjoying the coverage, enjoy the rest of the Giro. Thanks, lads.
Hello, Ed here from the Midlands. Are the Israeli Academy cycling teams still in the race? I haven't heard or seen anything of them. What's going on?
So we heard 2 questions there, Daniel. First one was from Cillian Kelly, and I did check whether it was the Cillian Kelly. I didn't recognise his singing voice. But he will be familiar to some people on Twitter.
He's in the same class as Lionel.
As Irish.
Lionel learns Italian, the remedial class.
Irish Peloton on Twitter, and Cillian's very good with his stats, and he'll be able to tell you whether
general mirth.
Yeah, when the last time was that an Italian named Vittorio aged 27, won a stage in Tuscany.
You'll get the answer to that tomorrow morning. I can guarantee you.
Yeah. So. He was asking about wild cards, and then we heard a question about the Israel Cycling Academy, who are here on a wild card, and obviously, they're in the race because the race started in Israel. That was a big factor in that, and they have been pretty invisible since the race got to Italy. the whole wildcard system, we have talked about this quite a lot. What are your thoughts on it, Daniel? Could it be better? My view is that there are just too many pro-continental teams.
There's an easy solution, a very easy solution that cycling shies away from because of its recent history or the recent history of doping, and that is some kind of league table or qualification system. And if you go back and look at the history and the origins of things like the World Tour, a rhetoric crept in, and it was probably the right thing to do at the time, to almost disincentivize performance and to offer guarantees, and it became much more like a closed shop. I mean, the World Tour is a bit of a closed shop. It moved away from a performance-based model, and I think the Grand Tour organisers are still a little bit reluctant, as well as being very glad to have the money, let's not beat about the bush, that some of the teams we think pay for wildcards in various forms, whether it be sort of quid pro quo kind of sponsorship deals or in other forms.
Cofidis, for example, at the Vuelta.
Well, exactly, and we've seen other ones, CCC at the Giro, the Polish team a couple of years ago. But I mean, the Giro makes some concession to performance by offering a wildcard to the winner of the Coppa Italia every year. But that's really the only one of the Grand Tours that makes any concession to performance. And like I say, I think they're nervous about doing it. I mean, I remember sitting in a Big Mat team car in 2002 I think it was the Dauphiné, and the wildcards had maybe not been assigned or had just been assigned, and they felt that they could force their way into the Tour with their performances, but it came at a time of the year, or it came at a time in professional cycling history when teams were going like rockets, the month or 2 months before the Tour de France, and it was a bit of an arms race because they knew that they could force themselves into the Tour with a big result, and I think that's something that the Tour organisers in particular don't want to repeat.
Hi guys, this is Orla in Dublin. I just wondered how you felt the team sizes were impacting the Giro, and if the reduced team numbers had any impact. So far it doesn't seem to have. Maybe with Sam Bennett, he lost one of his outriders, but then the sprints are not the same as they used to be. We don't see trains like they once were. It might be interesting now going into the mountains to see if there's any impact on any of the teams. I'd just like to hear how you feel it's going. Keep up the good work. Thanks.
Orla, not the Orla, another Orla from Ireland. Thank you for your question. It's an interesting question. I mean, one of the reasons given for the reduction in team size from 9 to 8 in the Grand Tours was make it safer. Now, it might be a coincidence, and Matt White certainly thinks it is, that there have been fewer crashes, I think, in this race, and
significantly
fewer. And the sprint trains and the hectic nature of the finales is perhaps also a consequence of there being not that many top class sprinters here.
But why are there not many top class sprinters? Because
there aren't many stages they can win.
No, well, I think it's also because teams no longer feel that they can fight on multiple fronts with only 8 guys. So
that's an interesting
Yeah, so most of them, so a lot of them have left their sprinters.
Or inadvertent consequence.
Yeah, a lot of them have left their sprinters at home. And there's a school of thought that might make it more dangerous because you've got these kind of maverick freelance sprinters who are not as well practiced as the Cavendishes and the Kittels. But the evidence suggests it's been safer in the sprints this time with fewer top sprinters here.
In terms of how the effect it will have on the race, I mean, Simon Yates is a very strong team, as we keep saying. I don't think even the stage when Chavez was off the back, Simon Yates was still pretty well supported, up front. So I never thought that it would have a massive bearing on a team's ability to control the race. I think Mitchelton Scott have controlled the race pretty well so far.
Yeah, and I think these in-race rest days that teams give to their riders, and Sky have done this for a few years, and they're not the only team, but I think we're seeing that more and more because with only 8 riders, you need to protect the guys you do have in the race even more. And there's been one good example this year with Mitchelton Scott. They basically gave Mikel Nieve not the whole first half of the race off,
fortnight off,
but they they gave him plenty of time to ride into form. They gave him a lot of days where he wasn't expected to do an awful lot.
They're expecting a lot of him this week, I think.
Yeah, and I think, maybe with 9 riders, I think that there is more of a premium on protecting the guys you do have when you've only got 8. With 9, you can afford to lose 1 or 2 or completely exhaust 1 or 2, which you can't afford to do with smaller teams.
Hi there, gents. It's Ed, long-time listener and friend of the podcast. I'm phoning in a question for the rest day press conference. Guys, you put yourself out there week in, week out. Keep up the fantastic work. It's essential. But my question is, the internet is a mean and cruel place. What is the worst of the trolling that you guys get? Want to hear a couple of tales of that. And also, my girlfriend would like to know, why is Lionel's nickname Napalm? She's speculating it's some sort of upset stomach incident. So a bit of clarity on that would be appreciated.
Is Lionel's nickname Napalm born from his reaction when he goes an hour without food?
Thank you, Ed and Chris. Both of you asked about the origin of the nickname Napalm. It's certainly nothing to do with the toilet incident. That was very disturbing.
It will be revealed in a forthcoming episode.
A future episode. But Ed also asked about social media, the internet, trolling. It's an interesting question because it's we've all been around working in as the social media phenomenon has taken off, and we've all learned a lot, I think.
It's been a steep old learning curve, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think when I first became aware of trolling was around 2012, actually, probably with the Bradley Wiggins Tour de France. And I'll not lie, it's very upsetting, and actually, I would say for a couple of years, for me, used up far too much mental energy, and because you think that you can argue your case and defend yourself and explain to people, well, it's not like that, it's like this. For me personally, I've been trolled over many years for the perception that I was somehow pro Sky, having written a book about Team Sky's first year. This is a point I actually made in the podcast last week, that I don't really see my job or a reporter's job to have to tell people what, to come to some kind of verdict or tell people what they should think. That book, I'll actually use another example. I did a book as well about Usain Bolt, and a question I was asked a lot afterwards was, well, is he clean or not? People were looking for answers, and the whole point in the book was to make you think about all the factors that went into his success. And same with Team Sky, it was about observation, it was about reporting, it was about telling you what I thought I
And
found
the key
out.
point being, Rich, at the end of both books, you didn't know yourself.
San Francisco. A community around the world. Stories and films with the most compelling characters. The world's finest apparel. Explore the world of cycling with Rapha.
But I don't know about you, Daniel, but I've learned, I think, to keep a healthy distance from social media. I still use it. I'm still on Twitter, but I don't really engage with some of the stuff that's on Twitter.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, really, because gradually, and you've seen this with riders as well, we've had to move away from certain issues. You simply don't engage on certain issues, even though you might have quite forthright opinions on them, because it's a fruitless exercise and it does cost mental energy, and it's hard when people suspect or perceive some kind of ill will or bad faith on your part when there simply isn't any. And most of the time the answer is that we don't know. They're some of the most underused words in journalism. I don't know. People see it as a badge of shame if you don't have certainties on a particular thing, when the opposite is true in a lot of cases. Life is complicated. Cycling is complicated. Some of the issues we're writing about are very complicated, and most of the time we can only provide snapshots which are there to be interpreted.
One of the problems is journalism has become more about opinion, and there's more and more opinion, and social media is certainly about opinion. And I like to think that we're not this, on the podcast, it's not just three people with strong opinions arguing with each other. We're kind of, it is more about, like I said last week, thinking about things ourselves and encouraging people to think rather than telling people what they should think.
Hi chaps, this is Jason Marson from Cambridge. Really enjoying the podcast this year from the Giro. Wanted to mention something about the tiramisu debate at the moment. Please don't shoot me for this, Daniel, but I once had a tiramisu from a patisserie in Cambridge that didn't have coffee in it. It just had chocolate. I don't know if that's genuine or not, whether I should have eaten it, but there you go. Keep up the good work.
Jason in Cambridge, if you could have seen Daniel's face.
Don't approve of that. Cambridge patisserie in arson attack. And coming to a local, local newspaper near you tomorrow morning. No, that's highly irregular, highly curious, highly irregular, and yeah.
I don't think you approve, do you?
Deplorable.
Hello, Daniel, Richard and Lionel. Thanks for doing a great podcast. One question I had that I was interested in was, what are the riders eating on the bikes during the Grand Tour? All this chat of wine and great Italian meals during the event is very interesting, but I was more interested in, are they downing energy gels and SIS peanut butter bars on the ride, or is there chefs prepare separate items for them? If you could let us know, that'd be great. Thanks.
Question about food on the day that Lionel's left the race. Oh my goodness. We did do a Kilometre Zero a couple of years ago at the Tour de France about what the riders eat. I think we did. They do obviously eat a lot of sports products. Obviously Science and Sport are the best, so they probably eat a lot of them. But they certainly vary it. And a lot of the... Well, if you hear our listeners' questions to our Science and Sport experts, even they will say that surviving on energy gels and bars and powdered drinks alone is probably a sure way to an upset stomach. And so they certainly vary it with rice cakes and things
sandwiches.
Like that. It's a bit easier on the
quite old-fashioned sandwiches in a lot of cases, jam, kind of meat sandwiches as well, don't they?
Hi guys, Tim from Australia here. Thanks so much for the podcast. I've got 2 Australian-related questions for you. The first is to support a bit of an outlandish claim that I made to my friends not long ago, and that is that Jack Haig will be the next Australian rider to win a Grand Tour. Please discuss. And secondly is, do you think Mitchelton Scott may be running short on patience with Esteban Chavez? Now, I know he's the bit of the favoured happy boy around the team, and he's had some success in the past, but it seems of late he's not delivered on the promise and the potential. So do you think that their patience is wearing thin? Thanks again. Look forward to the rest of the Giro and travel well.
Jack Haig and Esteban Chavez. Daniel. My goodness.
Well, Rich, Jack Haig, unfortunately, his record in time trials is very poor. Now, I don't know whether this is because he has always been deployed.
I can tell you he's going to do a very poor time trial tomorrow, as is everybody.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. He's always been deployed in quite important roles. And if you look at Jack Haig's Grand Tour career, he's always been riding for someone who's been up there on general classification, which may mean that he's always been told to economise in time trials. He did 1 or 2 okay ones as an amateur. There was one in the Giro della Val d'Aosta where I think he was 5th in a time trial. So we don't really know what his ability is in time trials. He's certainly a very good climber, but as we've said many times before, there's a huge difference between riding as a domestique and having your finish line 5 kilometres from the top of a summit finish and having to go all the way to the finish. And as regards him being the next Australian Grand Tour winner, well, there's a rider here at the Giro, Ben O'Connor, who I didn't know much about before this race, who has made a very strong case for that mantle.
Could Jack Haig be the first Australian Geraint Thomas, in the sense that he's a very jovial guy. He seems to be always in pretty good spirits. He's obviously very strong, very visible, very selfless, and a great team player. But, converting that, as you say, that visibility that we see, that strength that we see at certain points in the race, into being the guy that finishes it off, there's a world of difference.
I do think, and this relates to the second question, are they losing patience with Esteban Chaves? Well, that will simply come down, I think, to economics. And Mitchelton Scott are looking for a new title sponsor. They're going to survive next year. They'll be around. They don't know how big their budget is going to be. And do they keep Chaves or not? I think it will simply come down to how much Chaves wants and what they're prepared to offer. And that's what it usually comes down to in cycling. Loyalty does exist, but it's usually overridden by economics. However, another factor to consider is that Matt White and the management at Mitchelton Scott, it being an Australian team, might feel that Jack Haig has come to the point in his career and he's shown enough now that he needs to be really blooded as some kind of leader in some form of, whether it's big World Tour one-day races like the Volta a Catalunya or a Grand Tour. And they might feel that if they're going to keep both Yates brothers, which is not a foregone conclusion, but they probably want to, and they're also going to keep Jack Haig, then Esteban Chaves is surplus to requirements.
Hello, Richard, Lionel, and Daniel. This is Andy Gladstone from New York. I am a current and future friend of the podcast, unfortunately not past due to coming to cycling later in life, but for the past year or so have been enjoying your weekly coverage, and the Lionel of Flanders replay this year is what made me a friend of the podcast for now and the future. I also happen to have purchased the Journey Through the Cycling Year book on Amazon.uk. Unfortunately, it was not available in the US. It took almost a month to get here, and I received it last month. Initially, I was a bit disappointed because the book seemed to be a very slow read for me, until I realized that I was reading it in your voices. And once I started to read it in my own voice, it sped up. So I've been reading along with last year's Giro diaries during this year's Giro. I want to commend you on the excellent coverage last year and as well this year to date. The kilometer zeros have been compelling. Each of the podcasts has been amazing and is a great company, whether I'm on the Turbo Trainer or I am driving into my office and listening to them. My question for you is, in the post-EPO and PED era, assuming that we're in that era now, who is the most tragic cycling figure? And let's maybe stick to Giro. The reason I ask is because there may have been cyclists who just missed their prime during that era and were never able to win a Grand Tour when they should have, or they were the cyclists that after the era ended just couldn't keep up with the rest of the peloton. So what are each of your selections for the most tragic cyclists in the post-EPO era? Looking forward to your answer. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. I don't know if that effectively plugged the book or not. Daniel, what? I keep calling you Lionel. But a bit of a... we got there in the end, I think. Yeah, he got there in the end with it. But,
Very glad he listens anyway.
If you live in the US, it takes a month to get there and takes you a while to get into the book. But do still purchase it, please. The question was about tragic figures. I guess what he means, people who maybe didn't make it because of the doping in cycling. I mean, there are a few well-documented cases. The tragedy of doping is you don't know. You don't know how good somebody would have been without doping. You don't know how good somebody who you don't know about would have been if the others hadn't been doping. So that, for me, is the great sadness of doping. And I think for the athletes who dope as well.
Yeah, and I think in most cases that guys who in that era decided not to dope were guys with incredibly strong value systems and integrity, and they weren't in any way materialistic, or in some cases even were ambitious in terms of success, and they certainly don't feel like tragic figures because they've gone on to have very good lives because they've managed to be happy in whatever they've done. Christophe Basson's one of those. He's more associated with the Tour de France. With the Giro, there was a guy who we interviewed last year actually called Nicolas de Matteis, who was only a pro for about a year or two, but he was kind of ostracised from Italian cycling when he wrote a letter to La Gazzetta dello Sport, quibbling with something they'd written about doping being rife in Italian cycling, and he said, well, you can say what you like about other riders, but I certainly have never taken anything and never will. And life was made quite difficult for him after that. But again, he's gone on to find satisfaction in other things. One contender I would suggest, and I say this without knowing, and I don't think anyone really knows what the real story of his career has been, but Damiano Cunego won the Giro in 2004 in spectacular fashion. He was 22 years old, and his career, I mean, he still went on to win 3 Giri di Lombardia, Tours of Lombardy, but his career in Grand Tours was a very strange sort of diminuendo after that. It really petered out, and no one really seems to understand why. And there were noises over the years. There was a former teammate, Leo Bertagnoli, who said in an interview that Cunego had been robbed throughout his career because he'd been robbed by people who were cheating. There's a plausible theory that Cunego's first Giro win, that spectacular 2004 win, wasn't above board, and something changed in his mentality after 2004, hence his inability to reproduce the same results. We really don't know. I'd love him to write a book one day, but he's not a very expansive character. He's never really given too much away, so I doubt we'll ever know what really happened.
Do you remember a few years after that win, he started wearing a transfer, or tattoo, a fake tattoo that said, "I'm doping free," it said. But I think
with the syntax suggesting that
I'm doping for free.
Yeah.
No, but he meant I'm free of doping.
Yeah.
Hi guys, this is Rory near Brighton. My question for your rest day press conference is, what would a Grand Tour look like without teams like Wanty and Androni going up the road every day?
Thanks, Rory. It's a good question, actually, because the stages are enlivened sometimes by these smaller teams going up the road. And often the World Tour teams are reluctant to do that. What would happen if that wasn't happening? Would the bunch just roll along? It's a fascinating question.
Yeah, it is a good question. I'm not entirely.
What are the 3 most powerful words in journalism, Daniel?
I don't know. I mean, I suspect that this conversation or this discussion might become redundant in 20 or 30 years, because I think stages are going to become shorter and shorter and shorter. This year, that we might see another quantum leap in that direction with a 65-kilometre stage in the Tour de France. There was already a big change last year with the 100-kilometre stage. There are a couple of short ones this year in the Tour, and there's that 65-kilometre stage. And if that is a roaring success, then we'll probably see an even shorter one next year, or 2 short ones next year. And with stages of that length, the racing starts from kilometre 0, and there is no room for the kind of what we sometimes slightly scathingly call vanity breakaways.
It's interesting because in that, speaking to some of the female riders, that's the case in women's racing, that often they're not long enough for a break to go out and be allowed to get a certain lead and for it to then be reeled in slowly. We're not going to get through all the phone calls, I don't think, Daniel. We maybe got time for a couple more. And we did get some emails as well. Quick one from Jill Price here. I don't have WhatsApp, I'm afraid, so I can't leave a voice message, but I have a burning question. Where is Simon the photographer? I thought he would have been with you on your Italian travels. Hope he's okay. Jill, he is okay. I think he's busy rebuilding a house at the moment, but we hope he will.
Miss him, don't we?
We do miss him. He's a nice guy to have around. But he's alive and well near Watford, and he will join us at the Tour de France. This is an email also from Paul in mountainous Suffolk. Hi guys, great work with the Giro. I actually look forward to my commute each day. You really give a great sense of the race, the TV coverage. That's nice to hear. I tried using the WhatsApp phone, but I was just left hanging, so I thought I'd email a few questions. Paul in mountainous Suffolk, you don't ring the WhatsApp phone. You leave a voice memo. Nobody will answer. Question 1, how is the Aqua Blue single chainring working out? Have you had any feedback from the riders? Should I buy one? 2, how do you think reduced peloton has affected things? Well, we had that question already. Do do you think Froome? How many years do you think Froome has left as Sky's number one? Could we see Egan Bernal, who's just won the Tour of California, lead at the Tour de France next year? And finally, my 5-year-old boy believes that I ride professionally for Team Sky. How long should I let him continue to believe this? Should I just tell him or bury the news along with the whole Santa thing?
That's funny. Yesterday, Bernie Eisel was at the Giro, and I forget how old his daughter is. I think she's about 3.
He rides for Team Sky?
No, she thinks he's a racing driver.
Excellent. In terms of the single chainring question,
how diplomatic do you want to be on this?
I think that I would wait until next year to buy that. That'd be my.
No, I don't think it's been an unqualified success by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that team is awaiting delivery of new iterations of the 3T bike, which are going to have double chain rings for the Tour of Switzerland in particular. I think. I think it's been good. From what I've heard, it's been good some days, not so good others. On courses where there's a big variety of terrain, then it's not worked.
I think there's some nervousness about it. Froome, how many could we? I mean,
what do you know?
Talking about Cunego,
Yes.
winning the Giro at 22. We did used to see riders. Laurent Fignon was, I think, 22 when he first won the Tour de France. Bernardino was young.
Ulrich was 22 and
Greg
finished
LeMond was
second.
on the podium. It used to be, and we're maybe seeing it with Simon Yates now, but talent is talent, and riders who can win the Tour, Ulrich as well, riders who can win the Tour can often show that. Well, Quintana as well, of course, on the podium at that sort of age.
Well, the drum that Shearer has been banging all week, I don't know if you're aware of this, but he's been asking Dave Brailsford, is there any chance that Egan Bernal will go to the Tour de France this year? And they haven't ruled it out. It's very unlikely, but not impossible. I think that might hinge on what happens with Chris Froome's salbutamol case in the next few weeks. How much longer has he got? Usually when Grand Tour guys who have had some sort of dynasty in Grand Tours have just teetered over the top of their plateau, it's usually happened quite suddenly, hasn't it? And not too many guys who have won multiple Grand Tours have lost one or two and then returned to winning ways and won several more. So if Froome finishes in 3rd or 4th or 5th place in this Giro, then could be the end. I don't think that'll be the case, but it's not impossible.
Hi gents, Chris Wolfe here, friend of the podcast from Australia. Greatly enjoying the coverage of the Giro, and the daily updates has me humming Italian folk music for most of the day. I've been banking the Kilometre Zero specials to use as a sort of audio methadone patches to wean myself off the habit once the race is finished. I was just wondering what you think about the tactics of Yates and Mitchelton Scott to sort of continually look for opportunities to put time into Dumoulin, as whether that would be possible at the Tour, or whether it's the smaller nature of the Giro and the race route which is making it so effective here. We've seen the Tour being shut down so much by stronger teams recently, and climbers sort of unsuccessfully trying to put it all on one or two mountain finishes. Nibali's victory was probably the most similar sort of race we've seen at the Tour for quite some time. So just wondered what you thought about that. Thanks very much, and keep up the good work. Cheers.
Would Simon Yates be able to do at the Tour what he's done here?
Well, he kind of addressed that in his press conference today, didn't he? Because he was asked whether his attitude, his approach had changed because he was attacking a lot more in this Giro than he has done in previous Grand Tours, and he said, well, it's not that his mentality has changed, it's simply that he can attack now because there is no team setting a stifling rhythm on the front, which Sky have done in the past. And then he was asked directly, well, are Sky a lot weaker at this Tour than they have been at this Giro than they have been than they were in the Tour de France last year, for example? And he said yes. So there's part of an answer.
I think as well, it's simpler here when really his race has been all about Tom Dumoulin and the time trial, and you would have a field at the Tour, you'd have more guys in the mix, I think. So it's been quite an unusual race in that respect. There hasn't been there haven't been other people for him to look out for. You know, Chris Froome's not in his best form. There's no Nibali. So, you know, it's been and will continue to be, I'm sure, a fascinating race. But it's the way that he's raced has been dictated by the nature of the race, the time trial tomorrow, and the fact that Dumoulin is his big rival. So I think he would adapt his style according to the demands of the event.
I think he's been helped as well. Last year in the Tour and at various times we talked about the fact that the riding was quite defensive because there were a lot of guys in the top 5 or 10 for whom a podium finish or a top 5 was almost going to be a game changer, or it was certainly going to put noughts on their contract. In this Giro, if you look at the guys towards the top of the peloton, I don't think too many of them are really interested in finishing 3rd, 4th or 5th. Pinot has been there, done that before. Dumoulin wants to win. Pozzovivo is probably the only one, and you could make the same case, I suppose, for Miguel Angel Lopez, but I think he came in wanting to win as well. So what you've had every day is a lot of guys who were desperate to get something out of this race and get and are not happy with their current position. There aren't too many guys in the race who are satisfied. What that's meant is that their teams have been quite willing at certain points in the race to take things up, and they're not defending. And I think that's helped Mitchelton Scott, and it's helped Adam Yates. It's taken the heat off them. I mean, my abiding image of this Giro will not have been, if it goes on the way it has been going, it will not have been 6 Mitchelton Scott jerseys on the front just pounding away on, you know, most of the stages. But that would have been my image of a lot of Froome's Tours de France, for example.
Question for Daniel from David. Italians have given much to the cafe culture, and they should do. However, a flat white is a genuine method of serving coffee. It's a nice drink to have with milk when an espresso isn't long enough. Now, like spaghetti bolognese, which is a pleasant way of having a tomato-based beef sauce with pasta, pretending that it doesn't exist is simply false. Discuss.
Thank you, David. Again, Daniel's face was a picture. I appreciate that call. I'm with you. Daniel's in denial about the flat white. I've been trying to get flat. My goal this week in Italy is to get flat white and to introduce the flat white culture to Italy. You're right. It's a legitimate drink. And I shall long continue to enjoy my flat whites. Have you ever had a flat white?
No, Rich. I don't acknowledge the presence of the flat white. Just like, you know, you've got states in the world that don't acknowledge the presence of other states. I don't acknowledge the presence of that variety of coffee. I've never tasted it, and you know, no. In all seriousness, people can drink what they like, but I will not be. I will not be joining the flat white.
They're all
team, team flat white.
They're all just invented drinks, aren't they? Humans have made them up. I mean, somebody came up with an idea for a cappuccino,
but really, I'm in love with the idea. I'm in love with the idea of very punitive Italian food and drink dogmas, and that is really that is why I'm so attached to the idea of cappuccinos and cappuccinos only being allowed to drink cappuccinos at certain times. We discussed another one at lunch today that I had penne all'arrabbiata, which is, as most people know, it's a spicy tomato sauce. And I've been in Italian restaurants before, and I've seen people refuse Parmesan, and they've remonstrated with the waiters. No, they've wanted Parmesan. I like Parmesan. I'm having Parmesan on my arrabbiata, and they've been told they can leave, or they can. The waiter will grudgingly give them some pecorino, but never Parmesan. And I just love that about the Italians. I love,
even though, I mean, cheese. It's proven that cheese improves just about everything apart from coffee. I would say. Bit of cheese.
You're a bit of a heathen.
I'm no Lionel, am I? It's going to be a difficult week, I think, on the culinary front. Anyway,
but in all seriousness, one of the things I love about the Italians is they can be so cavalier and slapdash in some areas, and so absolutely rigorous and refined and sophisticated and uncompromising in others. And I just think that's very funny. And I find the Italians incredibly funny on a daily basis.
Well, that's all for this week. We haven't, I'm afraid, got through all the questions, but we got through a lot of them. And I think we'll try and do another one just after the Giro of these press conferences. So check the number on our Twitter bio and leave a voice memo. Don't call it. Leave a voice memo, please. In the meantime, we'll return tomorrow with our regular episodes from the Giro. The next Column to Zero comes on Wednesday morning for friends of the podcast. We released one today on Monte Zoncola and some reactions to that. Some of the atmosphere from top of the mountain. Thanks for listening to this. And let's resume tomorrow. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Rich.
Kotze,